the woman who saved 2,500 children from the Nazis. In the heart of Warsaw in 1942, the air felt heavy, as if the entire city had learned how to hold its breath. German soldiers patrolled the cobblestone streets with calculated coldness, their boots striking the ground like a cruel metronome. Posters shouting Nazi orders covered the walls, and the newly erected brick enclosure, the Warsaw Ghetto, loomed like a graveyard for the living. Behind those walls, over 400,000 Jewish men, women, and children were trapped in a world stripped of color, warmth, and hope. Disease spread like poison. Starvation hollowed bodies and cheeks, and through it all, the world outside pretended not to see. Yet one woman refused to look away. Her name was Irena Sendler, a quiet, soft-spoken social worker barely in her 30s, with dark hair pinned neatly beneath a scarf and eyes that held equal measures of grief and ferocity. To most people, she seemed ordinary, small in stature, polite, unassuming. But something lived in her that no uniformed soldier could intimidate, a moral compass carved into her soul since childhood. Her father, a compassionate doctor who died when she was just 7, left her with one sentence she never forgot. If you see someone drowning, you must try to save them, even if you cannot swim. That single line became the foundation of her courage. When the Nazis occupied Poland and forced the Jewish community into the ghetto, Irena found herself granted a rare permit to enter the sealed district under the guise of inspecting for typhus outbreaks. To the Germans, she was simply a social worker with a clipboard. To the families suffering inside, she was a lifeline. Every time she stepped through the guarded gate, her heart tightened. She saw the skeletal faces of children barely clinging to life, mothers begging for scraps, fathers staring into a void of hopelessness. And slowly, something began to happen. Mothers, the bravest mothers imaginable, approached her not with pleas for food, but for the one thing a mother should never have to surrender, their child. "Take my baby," they whispered. "Save them, even if I never see them again." Irena did not hesitate. She said yes, again and again and again. Working with Żegota, a clandestine Polish resistance group dedicated to aiding Jewish people, Irena helped build a rescue network that operated like a quiet miracle beneath the chaos of war. Priests, nuns, nurses, orphanage directors, and couriers risked their lives to smuggle Jewish children to safety. But rescuing a child from a prison guarded by soldiers armed with rifles required imagination and fearlessness. Irena devised multiple escape methods. Some were simple yet daring: sedation, blankets, false bottom toolboxes carried out on ambulances. She would drive into the ghetto in a medical truck with a child hidden beneath stretchers or inside a wooden box. Because a baby's cry could mean instant death, she trained a dog to bark wildly during inspections to mask any sound from the hidden infant. Other routes were more treacherous. There was an abandoned courthouse that straddled the ghetto wall. One door opened into the misery inside, the other into the free side of Warsaw. Children were guided through the pitch-black building, crawling silently through dusty hallways while Irena whispered encouragement from the shadows. And when both buildings and trucks became too dangerous, she took to the underground sewer system, dark, foul, crawling with rats. In those tunnels, the stench clung to the skin, and the sound of soldiers' boots above created a constant threat of discovery. Irena wrapped babies tightly against her chest, whispering lullabies in Polish as she waded through the fetid water. Each step forward was a rebellion. Each child carried out of the ghetto was a small victory carved out of despair. Some children escaped inside potato sacks, others hidden in suitcases, and, when nothing else worked, in coffins meant to disguise their living cargo. But rescuing them was only half the battle. Irena refused to let the Nazis erase who these children truly were. After assigning each child a new Christian identity and placing them in the care of nuns or sympathetic families, She carefully wrote down their real Jewish names, their parents' names, their birth dates, and their new aliases. Each tiny scrap of paper became a thread connecting a child to their true self. She placed the papers into glass jars, dozens of them, and buried the jars beneath an old apple tree in a friend's backyard. Her hope was simple. When the war ended, the children could be returned to their families. But hope is fragile in wartime. In October 1943, the Gestapo finally discovered her operation. Irena was arrested and dragged to Pawiak prison, a place where screams leaked through stone walls and torture was a routine cruelty. Soldiers beat her until her legs snapped. They shattered her feet. They twisted her bones until her body crumbled. Yet when they demanded the names of the rescued children, Irena looked them in the eye with a defiance that startled even hardened soldiers. "You will never get them," she said. Her silence was an act of war. The Nazis sentenced her to death, but fate had one more twist. Members of Żegota bribed a guard with a large sum of money. On the day set for her execution, that guard quietly marked her as killed, even though she was very much alive, and smuggled her out of the prison under cover of night. With broken legs and fresh wounds, she was carried away on a stretcher, half conscious. Most people would have disappeared to survive. Irena did the opposite. Still crippled, still in agony, still hunted, she returned to the underground resistance and resumed her work, determined to save every child she could. When the war finally ended in 1945, Warsaw was a skeleton of a city. Buildings were rubble, streets were dust, but the apple tree still stood in that quiet backyard. Irena returned to it. With trembling hands, she dug up the jars, her secret archive of hope. Inside were the names of roughly 2,500 children. She began the impossible task of trying to reunite them with surviving family members. But reality struck a cruel blow. For most of the children, there were no parents left to be found. Entire families, entire bloodlines, had been erased at places like Treblinka. Those reunions that did happen brought both joy and heartbreak. Children who had grown up with Polish families learned they were Jewish. Some were grateful, some were confused, some were devastated to learn that the parents who loved them more than life itself had died praying their sacrifice was not in vain. And through it all, Irena carried a grief she rarely spoke about. She had saved thousands, yet felt haunted by the ones she couldn't reach. For decades after the war, she lived quietly in Poland, largely unknown outside her country. She became a nurse, raised her own children, and continued serving those in need without fanfare. She never bragged about her courage. She never sought applause. When, late in her life, a group of American students discovered her story and traveled to meet her, they asked how she found the strength to risk her life every day. Irena responded with a whisper that carried a lifetime of humility and sorrow. "I could have done more. This regret will follow me until the end of my days." But history remembers her differently. Irena Sendler saved more Jewish children than anyone else during the Holocaust, more than Oskar Schindler, more than most of the world's celebrated heroes. She lived to be 98 years old, passing away in 2008, long after the war had ended, but never far from the memories of the tiny hands she carried to freedom. Her story lives as a reminder that light doesn't always come from warriors, nor from kings, nor from armies. Sometimes it comes from a small, quiet woman who refused to look away. A woman who walked into the jaws of death armed with nothing but courage. A woman who carried 2,500 children out of hell because she decided that every life, every single life, was worth saving. In the darkest chapter of history, Irena Sendler became proof that even when the world loses its humanity, one person's compassion can keep the flame alive. And in that flame, 2,500 children found their future again. Thank you so much for watching. Please don't forget to subscribe.